to Down Your Unders. Down Your Unders. Review and dissection of content from some of the sharpest minds in the game. Hosted by Adam Camilleri. Art of War. Down Under.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this episode 176 of the Art of War Down Under podcast. It is stats time, and we are going to be deep diving in because we have not done one of these since the balanced data slate and or two new codexes have dropped their way into our mighty meta. That means we're once again joined by the incomparable, the handsome and dashing, effervescent 8th edition brother of mine, Peter the Falcon. How you doing, mate?
I'm doing really good, man. Doing really good.
I'm really happy to hear. You're doing really good. He and I were just having some old world gushes about how much we are looking forward to that game, how much we are also quietly quite enjoying our 40k also in a decent kind of way. But my man, it's been 12 weeks. Last time we did this was the day before your birthday, I believe, all the way back in September. And now we're sitting here mid of December, trying to do our end of year stats wrap up. It's going to be an interesting one to talk about because I think we've got, I guess, the first 5 months, 6 months of this edition kind of to evaluate as well.
Yeah. Oh yeah, there's a lot to talk about.
Yeah, baby. So, for those who do not know, this is a two-part podcast, of course. Second part is actually a very spicy, very nice hot takes episode I've done with Richard Siegler, getting his thoughts on the two factions that came out recently, Admech and Necrons, what he thinks of both, what he likes about both, what he dislikes about both, etc. So, if you want to get that, jump over to part 2, which will be found on Patreon at Art of War Down Under. Peter, what would you like to plug, if anything?
I guess I'll plug goonhammer.com. It's a website that I'm a part owner of. It's a great website for kind of your gaming needs. We primarily cover Warhammer 40k in great detail every week, but we literally cover anything else you can think of, whether it's D&D, Magic the Gathering, Old World,
yeah, baby.
AOS, all that weird stuff that like old guys play. I think the only thing we don't do is model trains.
Yet. The model train meta is on the rise, mate.
Model train meta is on the rise. I've said it before. Like the only thing separating 40k players from being model train collectors is age, for the most part. That's about it. There just comes a point, something triggers in our brains, and we're like, I would just rather own a train, like Rod Stewart.
So I was walking around with my brother. We were looking at and his kids, and we were looking at some Christmas decorations and stuff. And he asked me like, "How does like 40k? What is 40k when it, and Warhammer and stuff like that? When you really break it down, what kind of games are they?" I'm like, "Dude, secretly, it's all just model trains. Yep. Look at that, model trains. See that over there, model trains." And then I'm like, every hobbyist gets to their fork in the road where they're either, am I going to get into model trains or Napoleonic historicals? These are my two options as a human.
Yeah, it just comes a point where you don't want to make laser noises anymore.
That's
and
right.
Like, okay, I can either recapture the 15th Rifles, or I can recreate Birmingham Station, and that's all I got. Correct.
Well, it might be like platform 9 3/4 for our generation, but same diff. All right, my man. This is a stats episode. For those who do not know, the Falcon and I maintain a living stats ladder, faction ladder, for Art of War Down Under. And every time we do one of these, we start off with where were we when we left off. Before we do that, how is that data set for the great game of 10th edition 40k coming along, mate? How many games you got under your belt? How are you feeling about the data that you're collating? And what confidence can you bring to your estimations this day?
Like, there's a lot of games being played at 40k right now.
It's insane, man. It's so good.
So for the sake of this, like, I know our last talk was on September 14th. We're going to use October, November, and December data. So 3 months, roughly 3 months worth of data. The reason why I'm skipping the last couple of weeks of September is because we got the Space Marine Codex, and that did change up the meta. Pretty significantly, maybe not on the Space Marine side, although they have had a splash. But I feel like Space Marines did change some of what we considered like A-tier factions in particular that kind of got a little rotation with more Space Marine players coming back into the fold. So, like, I've got almost 2,000 games worth of Eldari data. I've got 1,500 games worth of Chaos Space Marine data, 1,000 games worth of Votan and World Eaters, and 500 games worth of Sisters of Battle on my plate. We're going to be looking at 20, 30,000 games worth of data just in this 2-3 month period, or 3-4 month period. So
amazing. And just to think, like, due to yourself, we're all the way here now, whereas 4 years ago, 5 years ago, 6 years ago, 6 years ago, 6 you've been doing this.
I started at the end of 2018, so 5 years.
That's what I thought.
5 years ago. 5 years ago, we had a Excel spreadsheet that Paul McKelvey sent to Val Heffelfinger on like a cold December night when he was probably drunk on wine on a beach in
Morocco,
San Francisco Bay. And since then, things upgraded a lot. I mean, and it's gone a long way from when I was manually writing down numbers from
counting beans.
Because not everybody used BCP back then, so I would often get emails with like, "Here's what we did," and it was just photocopied pieces of paper with how everybody did on an event. And BCP in particular exploded, but we also had Tourney Keeper and Tabletop.to and other apps. And then we started manually auto scraping data, and we had all sorts of other stuff happen. And now we've got 40kstats.goonhammer.com, which I don't have to do any work on now. The lovely engineers have been able to automate the vast majority of it for me. We've got StatCheck, which kind of picked up a lot of the steam when I had to take a break for mental health reasons from when I was doing it by hand. And Jeremy Atkinson and Custodes Cliff and Nathan Henning and I guess Innes Wilson, although I don't think he actually knows how to do maths, kind of took up that mantle and have carried on with a beautiful website if you really want a number crunch.
It's really good.
Yeah, like it's been great for statistics, and I love every minute of it. And I really hope. I just saw Age of Sigmar's come back with stats. They had kind of disappeared for a while, and there was a huge dump there. And with Old World coming out, I can't wait to see what. Maybe I'm going to have to do it, but I can't wait to see what kind of number crunching we get out of that too. Like,
yeah, man,
beautiful time to be alive.
It is so good. We're in such a stats-rich environment at the moment. But let's kick this off, my man.
Yes.
So, for those of you who do not know, we pretty much just go through the tiers of the competitive, accepted competitive tiers of the game. So that's D tier, C tier, B tier, A tier, and S tier, and we categorize every single faction in the game into one of these. There has been some significant changes to the game. The first faction in D tier is Leagues of Votan as it sits right now. Let's see how much that has changed. And that's Death Guard and World Eaters. That's the literal bottom three from the previous one. But we're going to be talking quite a few acronyms as we go through this. Peter, would you like to reel off what they may be for the layman?
Sure. The biggest acronym I use when I kind of look at how a faction is performing, the two biggest are TWIP and first round loss. So TWIP or GWIP, as some people call it, tournaments in winning position or games in winning position. This calculates like the percentage a faction goes to at least 4-0 at an event before they suffer their first loss. When compared to every other faction. So usually we look at the TWIP share, the TWIP percentage of a faction, compare it to how much they're actually being played. And it gives us a rough idea of how strong a faction is. So if, to make it simple, if let's say 50% of players in the world played Space Marines and 50% of people that hit TWIP were Space Marines, that's probably you would say that's probably a balanced faction, but at the same time, if up to 50% were playing it, there's a problem. But you get the idea. So, like as an example, we've seen in the past, Eldari often are between like 5 and 7% of the meta, depending on how good they're doing. If you're at 5% of the meta and you have 10% of TWIP,
that's crazy.
You're doubly represented at the top tables. That's very good. Whereas if you are, say, someone like Tau, which might be 3 to 4% of the meta, but they're only at 1 or 2% T-Whip, it's probably representative that they're not performing very well. Obviously, factions that are at 0% T-Whip, they be struggling real bad because they're just
Big
never
trouble.
hitting the top tables. For average first round loss is another really good indicator of how factions are performing, and that's literally just like the average round that the people playing this faction suffer their first loss. So generally, a balanced faction is going to be around a 2. 2.05 is kind of like the perfect average to have for an average first round loss. So when I'm looking at data, if I see anything between, say, a 1.9 and a 2.1, those factions I consider generally balanced as long as they're seeing enough play. Stuff below that, they might be struggling. And the higher you go, of course, like the better you are. And we've seen like the most broken factions at times hit first round losses of 2.9 and 3.0 before, which is it's unreal. Generally, if you're at that level, it means that 60 to 70% of your players are getting to 4-0.
Exactly right. Yeah, just doesn't matter who you are, how good you are at the game. Just bring the faction. That to me is when we can start say a faction is carrying the player.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, generally once you get in those high, and so time periods where we've seen those, which spoiling the lead, we're not in right now. Like those have generally been the worst times for 40K is when we start seeing those 2.6, 2.7, 3.0 average first round losses, like old Iron Hands back when it was the most broken thing. Raven Guard, when they had their moment in the sun, those were like 3.0 factions. Eldari have a couple times, and Harlequins have sat at like 2.9, 3.0 in the past. Those aren't good times. Those aren't good time periods. And then we also look at win rates. I don't put as much passion into win rates, although the more data we get, the more accurate win rate kind of shows compared to like how good a faction is. But so I do look at that as well.
Fantastic. All right, let us go off where we left off because, like I said, there's a living faction ladder, so we do update it for where we were when we left off. Starting with our D tier. Now, keep in mind, I think this was the week that the balanced data slate came out. So we were doing the data from before the balanced data slate with the knowledge of what was changing in the balanced data slate. So here's what we had. So this is almost pure index hammer. We had Leagues of Votann, Death Guard, World Eaters, Sisters, and GKs, or Grey Knights in the D tier. C tier was Drakari, Tau, Dark Angels, Space Wolves, Blood Angels, Guard, Admech, Black Templars, and generic Astartes, that being, any of the other Astartes I just read. B tier was Chaos Knights, Tyranids, Orcs, Demons, and Chaos Space Marines, hilariously. And then A tier was Imperial Knights, Necrons, Custodes, Thousand Suns, and Deathwatch. And then in the S tier, of course, we had Gene Stealer Cult and Eldari. So, but when we wrote that down, we were staring down the barrel of a holistic amount of changes, and we did on the part 2 of that episode, we actually did a full predictions tier. And even then, I think we were pretty close on a couple of fronts. We may read that out later when we do the fully updated one and see how close we got. There's definitely some that are incorrect. We have World Eaters in the D tier.
I think the thing I was most wrong was about Grey Knights. I thought Grey Knights would turn out to be much better than they ended up being. They just weren't as killy as I thought. I think Necrons, well, now that they've got their codex, are going to be fantastic. But Necrons, I also felt were going to be way stronger. But there were just too many armies that dumpstered the Necron block. So
easy done. To that end, mate, let us jump on in and start updating this bad boy. So let us go into that D tier. What is in there right now as it stands?
Our new D tier. So first off, the bottom of the barrel, my boys, my favorite army in the entire world. But they just got nerfed into oblivion. Adeptus Custodes.
They got annihilated. So those who do not know, the balanced data slate hit them. There's only 2 armies that I feel like the balanced data slate hit holistically. Although Custodes didn't get rules changes, did you?
They had a couple strat changes.
That's right. Yeah, that's rule changes.
And then it was points, and then all the main thing.
And then unit sizes.
Points, unit sizes. They got hit like across the board.
Yeah,
and the fact that the devastating wounds change happened as well meant that their core ability basically just no longer functioned with 99% of the stuff in the game. Adeptus Custodes have become like bad Death Guard if you want to have a chance at success with them. You're like religiously using Deep Strike and and just hoping for the best, because most of your best units are pretty slow.
Your shooting is actually not that good, apart from the Caladius Grav tank. Your shooting is pretty negligible, so you can't even try and trade shots from deployment zones and try and jostle position. You don't have enough units to trade.
Good. A lot of the good units, a lot of the units that benefited from the change and also the Space Marine release, just outclass the Caladius in terms of damage output.
Correct.
So they don't last on the board unless you're on a very heavy board, and even when you're on a very heavy board, it's not amazing. Because of the changes to the fly special rule. Yeah, like Custodes have struggled. So like since the Space Marine launch, Custodes have had one person go undefeated in any event. That's it.
Wow.
It's I think them and Imperial Knights are the lowest of anybody. So like their T-Whip percentage is less than 1%. They had been one of the more popular armies. They still are. But they went from being like 5 and 6% of the meta down to 3% of the meta, almost 4. Their win rate's only 40%. They have an average first loss of 1.4, which is the lowest in the game right now. By a strong margin. Because one thing I will say is that balance data slate really did balance out basically everybody else to a strong degree. It's just Custodes and one or two other factions did not benefit. So.
And one of those other factions, I would not be surprised if it's coming up soon. We're going to see Imperial Knights join him in the D tier?
Yes, Imperial Knights are probably the second worst faction. To be fair, it's pretty 50-50. Like they both have very similar win rates, depending on the data you're looking at. Because like I know some people like to use Stat Check and 40K Stats. 40K Stats caps at 28 player events. Stat Check goes down to 25. So that means they pull a few more events than we do. Imperial Knights,
the ruffians, the uncouth ruffians, mate. How dare they?
Imperial Knights, if you don't have those lower things, they're up to like a 43% win rate, 44% win rate the last few months. If you do include the 25s, they drop down to be a 42, 41, just like Custodes.
That's wild. That was 2 A-tier factions that with one balanced data slate went to the 2 worst factions in the game. Yeah, so it's undeniable that was overboard. Way too much.
Oh yeah, like the changes to towering were big, but then they also modified the bondsman ability for Imperial Knights
and Overwatch
and Overwatch, and like those 3 things, they probably could have kept bondsman the way it was, and Imperial Knights would have been fine.
Yeah, and that's my hope. My hope is that they undo that one and then wait and see a bit, and then if they need to do further, so be it. But 100% they need to undo that. All right, then, what is next in the Ds?
And next in D, I would say is you're looking at Drukhari.
Well, is anyone even playing it? I do.
That's
I do.
part of the problem is that
I do my
very few people are playing it. You basically have Scary, and that's it in terms of quality players trying to make it work.
I mean, week after week, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, Sky's played some Necrons though, so he's felt the robot love, and they're very strong now. So
they couldn't be. It's so funny to me that they couldn't be further apart, like further more juxtapositioned, and he still loves both. It's just crazy to me. Anyway, continue, sorry, mate.
But yeah, Drukhari, they've got like a 1.57 average first loss. Oh, Imperial Knights are at a 1.5 as well. They're also sitting at that like 42, 43% win rate. Some weeks they'll get into like 45, 46, but it's not like they're just not performing. They've hit T-Whip once, just like Custodes. Overall, they're just not hacking it right now. So I would put Drukhari in D. Yeah, and I would put Deathwatch in D.
Well, another one.
Yeah, mainly because with Deathwatch now, there's no reason not to just run all of the other Marines with the Marine Codex coming out. The Deathwatch. The changes to the Deathwatch, because they did get nerfed as well. Their detachment got nerfed. Were just too big. I don't even think they were necessary after all the other changes to the game.
Totally agree.
So that combined with the fact that we got a Space Marine Codex that heavily favored running like Ultramarines
Mhm.
or Blood Angels or Black Templars over any of the other factions, Death Watch definitely dropped
Yeah,
off the face of the earth.
entirely marginalized. The marginalized Marine out of that codex and balanced data state shift.
Yeah.
What's there been player representation? Does anybody still play them? Like,
Oh,
it's crazy.
it's extraordinarily low. Like I think in the last 3 months we've had 32 players. It is the
That's
lowest of any of the represented factions,
that's bonkers. That's yeah. Fair.
other than
All right.
Harlequins. But Harlequins, I mean, most people are running them as
Eh,
right?
yeah,
So
exactly
I
right.
wouldn't count that.
Yeah. Anything else in D tier?
Um, I think there's a strong argument for Chaos Demons being in D tier. You could
Yep.
argue C tier for Chaos Demons, but because they have had better T-Whip representation, but their average first round loss is the same as Drukari and Death Watch. Really,
Yep.
their win rate is very low. It's at like a 44%. They have had 4 or 5 people actually get to T-Whip and go undefeated. Sorry, they've had like 6 people go hit T-Whip and go and 4 of them go undefeated. So there are a handful of people, or maybe 2 people, that are making it work, which would be the only argument for being C. But you could say just top of D. I think is perfectly adequate here.
Beauty. So interestingly, we had 5 factions in D tier in the previous faction ladder, and we have 5 again in this one, but they are all different. There is not
Mhm.
one that is the same from last D tier to this D tier. So from
And
this is pre data slate to post data slate.
And one thing I'll say about this
Fascinating.
D tier is like the upper end of this D tier would have been a C tier faction, and I would say, in any other time we did this, because things
Yep.
have cushioned up more. Like that 43% win rate for me used to be like, okay, well now we're looking at C,
Yep.
and there's
Yep.
really only 2 factions below it. Like Custodians and Imperial Knights are the only 2 that can't even get into that zone, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Interesting. What are we starting C tier off with?
I think we'll start C tier with Blood Angels.
Yep.
So Blood Angels have shown like that they can definitely win. Firestorm and Ironstorm lists have
Yep.
seen some success with Blood Angels because Death Company are very strong. And we're seeing Battle Predators being used in Ironstorm lists. And
Don't you just love it? Doesn't it doesn't it make your heart sing to see a ball
yeah.
on the table?
Yeah, I mean, I just bought one and was tried to convince to buy a second. So like Blood Angels have it, but there's just running Ultramarines is probably just better across the board in almost every way, unfortunately, because of Calgar and
Yeah.
Ural Ventress. That said, like
Mhm.
like Blood Angels being a C tier faction is purely from a stats. I would say in my mind they're more of a B tier faction, but statistically they've an average first round loss of 1.74, which would have been a B tier rating not long ago. But this is just where the game's gone.
Yep.
They've had 5 people hit T-Whip. So their T-Whip representation is like 1%, which isn't terrible. Consider they only make up 2% of the meta. That their win rate though is quite low. It's like borderline 44%. So
Fair. Yeah.
next in C, I would say is Gene Stealer Cults.
Ooh, how the mighty have fallen.
Yeah.
Look, I suppose that is that is 3 tiers down, the same as Custodians and Imperial Knights.
Yeah. The big thing with Gene Stealer Cults is most people just stop playing them unless your name is
That's
Alex
correct.
McDougall.
Yep.
So they've always kind of been a low represented army. They make up 1.5% of the player base. They do have a T-Whip of 1.5% as well. Like, so that's great. They're a 1-to-1
That's
ratio.
really good. Yeah.
But their like average win rate is still only about a 45. Average first loss is 1.86. So it's not they're not terrible. Them and Tyranids I would say, are about the same area. What I would say for Tyranids, though, that sets them apart, even though their average first round loss is about the same as, like they're actually a little bit more successful on the T-Whip and undefeated fronts, basically. So
yeah, I'm really fascinated with the Tyranids Codex because, I mean, when it came out, there was. It wasn't a crazy amount of hype, as in like there wasn't anything overly busted, anything apparently the best thing in the book. Do you have any idea what's been performing the best stats wise?
I think stats wise, the most success has been carpet lists. Just
Unfortunately, but fair.
but it's a hard list to run, right?
Yeah.
I do know like a couple team events have seen people go like heavy Norn lists, and like Vanguard has made some attempts.
Yep.
But it just feels like the Unending Swarm is the more successful. Like Tyranids are 1.8 for their average first round loss. They've had 24 people hit T-Whip, which is a really successful number. 10 people undefeated. They make up 6% of the meta, and they have 5% of T-Whip. So they're like I would say they're a high C tier army. You could almost put like our C tier is very small in my opinion. It's just the win rate is very low at a 45.
So is that all that's in C tier? Blood Angels, GSE, Tyranids?
47. I mean, I would say you should also put Guard in C tier.
Yeah.
And
I'm just sitting here being proud of Adeptus Mechanicus being in B tier. Unless.
So here's the problem with Adeptus Mechanicus is like, they have an amazing average first round loss. It's 2.1, which is incredible.
Wow.
They only have their win rate's only 48%, 47.
And there's like literally like 3 people and playing them in the entire
they've had 70 people use it, right? But of those 70 people, like 5 of them hit T-Whip, 3 of them were undefeated.
Yep.
So like I would say they're at like the bottom of B with some numbers that could make them an A-tier army. Like a couple of their numbers are in that area. But yeah, I would say you could put Guard in C tier, and you could probably put Necrons in C tier. But this is me changing like what a C tier used to be almost.
Well, that's the thing. This
just because things have crunched up. So you know what? Let's scratch that. We're gonna say Necrons and Guard are B tier, and we're gonna stop. And Tyranids, we'll say Tyranids are the top of C. Just because the win rate is so low.
Tell me, you said this crunched up thing a couple of times. Explain that to people. What has happened here? We've had a kind of redistribution, a redefining of what our tier lists are. And I think this is only going to, this is something that is inevitable and going to happen as the game evolves. But explain that to people.
So we've had like fluctuations in I would say what is like a good versus like an S or an A tier army versus a D tier army in the past. If we go way back to like early mid 8th edition, like your worst factions were generally like we would have 1 or 2 factions that nobody played, like Grey Knights, that would be at like a 30%, but almost everybody else would be between 45 and 55%.
Yep.
So a D tier faction, you might say Grey Knights are D tier. C tier, here's a bunch of guys that are at like between 45 and 48% win rates.
Yep.
And then B tier would be in that 50% range. A would be like 52, and then your S tier would be like the one guy like Inari or something.
At 53, 54, yeah.
And then we went to a period where things went absolutely fucking batshit crazy.
There's your one, Peter. There it is.
A long time. Yeah, there's our PG rating being maintained. But where we had like, we'd have 2 or 3 factions at like 60, 70% win rates and these crazy average first round losses of 3 and T-Whips of like T-Whip representation where they're like triple what their actual representation is and stuff like that. And we had that for a long time. So all of a sudden, like, it changes like the graph where now a D tier army, yes, they're still like a 30% win rate army. C tier is now like a 38% win rate because at least they're winning something. B tier all of a sudden becomes these like 45, 46, 47% win rate guys. Because there's like the top end is so skewed, right? And now I think like things have changed. Like we have a huge amount of factions that are in that like very sweet 48 to 52, 53% win rate. And there's only 2 or 3 that are above that are in that scary zone that even GW thinks is out there. Although if you look at GW stats, they would say there's no faction in that zone or one faction, I think, based on their last thing. But anyway, So we've seen the kind of a crunch up where when I'm saying these armies are C tier, last time I probably would have said they were like low B,
Yeah.
because they're good numbers, and that's why I'm kind of waffling on saying it. And we also have a bunch of factions with low win rates, but really good average first round loss and good T-Whip, because the top end is way more fleshed out than it's been in a long time. Like to basically say that there's only 2-3 factions that have 0 to 1 T-Whip representation over this many games.
Yep.
Is we wouldn't have seen that before, right?
That is 100%. Yeah.
So like almost everybody's got 10, 15, 20 players that have hit T-Whip at the very least, and that's not something we used to see ever.
Well, that's an indication of some level of balance, internal balance in the game. Whether
exactly
that be the mission level, or the armor construction level, or the detachment choosing level, or something is keeping us in a relatively good place.
Yeah.
All right, let's truck on with this B tier. So we got Astra Militarum, Necrons, and Adeptus Mechanicus so far.
Yeah, and they're all like 47-ish% win rates. They've got decent T-Whip representation. They've had like Necrons and Astra Militarum are basically exactly the same in terms of win rate, in terms of T-Whip rep, in terms of average first round loss. There's a very small differential. They're at about 1.7. Tau Empire, basically the same. The only difference is we're getting a little more undefeateds with the Tau Empire. I think that kind of goes to the power of the crisis bombs, and if you cannot deal with them at your like, local meta. Grey Knights, also B tier. They don't have as much representation as those other armies I just mentioned, but they're still not doing terrible. They've only got a 47% win rate, only 150 players, so about 3% of the meta, just under 3% of the meta.
Yep.
But 10 people have hit T-Whip, 5 of them undefeated with
That's
those numbers.
Good. Yeah.
Chaos Knights, definitely like in that B tier. They're also at that like 47, 48, 49% win rate, depending on the day. Depending on the dates you're pulling your data from. They've got a 1.83 average first round loss. T-Whip is they make up almost 5% of the meta, and their T-Whip is almost 4%. So like they're very well represented. They're represented at top tables.
Yes, they are.
And that goes to just like how good War Dogs are. Like War Dogs ban with maybe one big boy.
Yep, that's
we already
exactly
mentioned
right.
Admech, which suffered from nobody playing them, so it's hard. But that average first round loss is incredible.
So should I chuck? Because I had Admech up next to Necrons and Astra Militarum. Should I chuck them where Chaos Knights are?
I would say we can leave them at B. We've already discussed them. We know where they're at.
You know what I mean? Like to the upper end of B.
Oh no, yeah, I would say that's fine. Yep.
Impressive.
And then I would say our last two B would be Orcs and Death Guard.
Good old Death Guard. Look at them go. Orcs is pretty much exactly the same as where they were, but Death Guard was they were the second worst army in the game previously.
And so Death Guard.
Well done.
Death Guard are like a very I've got them at a 48% win rate. Stat Check has them at a 50% basically since the Space Marine dropped. They've got good T-Whip representation. Their average first loss is 1.8. T-Whip, they make up. They're like Chaos Knights in that they make up about 4.5% of the meta. They're about 3% of T-Whip. So like they're holding strong. They're very solid. Orcs, we're seeing another spike happening right now with Orcs, where they could arguably be like an A tier faction. In fact, actually, I would put Thousand Suns below Orcs, if I'm being honest right now. When I really look at this data and I look at everything holistically. Because while Orcs have a slightly worse win rate than T-Suns, the rest of their data is much better. They have an average first-round loss of 1.95, which is where I would generally put a B-tier faction. Their T-Whip is 5%, which is very good. It's higher than their average, their field representation right now. And we're seeing them start to go up and up and up. Like we've seen Shad Naden start playing at a couple events with them again. The one cool thing I will say about the last probably month and a half of watching competitive 40K
Yep.
is seeing the top end begin to, like the A tier, I would say, start to evolve. Orcs slowly moving into that A tier, Sisters of Battle moving into that A tier, with some high end players saying they're an S tier faction in their opinion. That just the stats don't represent it. We're seeing that move, and I think I think that more than anything shows how good the meta currently is from a competitive standpoint.
Yeah.
With a couple exceptions.
Totally agree.
Right?
And it was interesting to note that I guess the previous faction ladder we did was purely the index hammer capture. It was just index hammer. So this one is going to This one is going to be capturing the impact, I guess, in key that we've had in the development since the post data slate, and also the Tyranid Space Marine effect. We've already seen the first Space Marine faction coming into the C tier in Blood Angels, and they're joined by the entire other codex in the Tyranids. So unfortunately, the Tyranid codex not making a big impact.
And something this is my fault because of how things have been with the Space Marine Codex. There's really no differentiation between any of the non-Codex Space Marines. So I would say Codex Space Marines, as it is like a high B, low A army, because their win rate is terrible. Which it almost always is, right? Like
100%.
Space Marine win rate, I believe right now is at like a 45%, right? 44 to 45 week to week. But they're showing they're having a lot of people have success with them. So I think we'll slot Space Marines in B with an asterisk, because I would say Space Marines are a B across the board, except Ultramarines are and Black Templars are like A tier factions.
And we can definitely put Black Templars in the A tier as their own cutout. But the issue with the Stardies is that, and I'm talking generic Stardies, is that they are such an eclectic bunch. You could be playing Crimson Fists, you could be playing White Scars, you could be playing, literally, John Lennon's Ultramarines list, best, one of the best lists in the world. And there's such a disparity between them, and also they just have such a phenomenally large meta representation from the entire gamut of competitive players that you always get, you're always going to get a big disparity. What actually is their meta representation? And if you have it from, did we see much of an uptick from Index Hammer to Codex Hammer with the Stardies, if you can go back that far?
Yeah, so base of Stardies are at about a 7.6 right now. But then if you add on like Death Watch, Blood Angels, Dark Angels, and the rest, they go up to we're at 18. We're at like a 22% of the meta is Space Marines right now since the Codex drop.
That's nuts. Yeah, 22%. That's absolutely.
And then if we look at pre-Codex, just give me a moment while I grab that for you.
I appreciate that.
We'll just go a few months back. Marines are 6, 9,
nice,
10, 11. They're about 12%. So they jump from about 10%. Being 1 in every 10 players, 1 in every 9 players, to being 1 in every 5 players are playing Space Marines right now.
Wow. Almost doubled. There you go. So that is a good indictment. I would love to see the Tyranids one, and unfortunately, I think I'd be a little bit disappointed there.
Tyranids? So Tyranids were 5% pre.
Yep.
Pre their Codex drop, and now they are. Let me just work some filter scenarios here.
He's going to move some beans. He's going to get out of calculus. He's going to check the position of the sun, people.
They're at 6. They went from a little over 5 to a tiny bit over 6. So the needle barely moved.
Barely moved. Yeah, that's a bit rough. All right, back to the job at hand. Now that we've had our little side quest, A tier factions. Let's go.
Okay, A tier factions. I say the bottom of A tier right now. We kind of already talked a little bit about Orcs being possibly moving into A tier. Sisters of Battle, I believe, have moved into the A tier.
That's amazing. I love that so much, because much like Chaos Space Marines, you can't point at a single reason why Sisters are doing so good. In fact, they've had just about all the ability to do most of what they're doing right now, except the meta was different. And so I think The meta
I think
shifted a little bit, and then the stuff that they were doing just meant more.
power armor jumping as much as it did, Iron Storm being kind of the best way to run Space Marines, I think helped Sisters a little bit. Sisters, Chaos Space Marines being as good as they are helps Sisters to a degree because they have answers to accursed spam.
They do. Yeah, they do.
They're very good at scoring. I think there just comes a point where, especially when you get a couple of good like top end players, start looking at the data differently. There was that GW event that Sisters won. I think that really helped everything.
Tampa,
right?
I believe.
Yeah, where people were like, well, who the heck is this random Joe? This was a very soft meta, which let's like a lot of the GW events can be as the year goes on. Unfortunately,
that one wasn't.
Yeah, exactly.
But like the entire, yeah.
But often that's kind of what people think, and so it can be written off. But when you have an event that does have a handful of really good players, whether they knock themselves out or not, like it, all of a sudden you get these guys that take the second look and they're like, well, why did they win? And then, oh yeah, okay, well we have this and it has this, and acts of faith are still faith dice are still like super powerful miracle dice. Sorry.
Yep. Same thing, mate.
So like there's a lot there. They score amazingly well. They're very killy. Paragon suits are not terrible in the slightest. So yeah, like there's a lot to be said for the meta adjusting the way it did into there being so much more power armor, and Sisters having so many tools to deal with that.
Yeah, I do totally agree with that take. All right, what else is in this A tier?
Also in the A tier, we would have Black Templars. I think are an A tier faction. They have an amazing win rate.
Where are my Dark Angels at?
Dark Angels, I kind of forgot about them.
Dark Angels and Space Wolves are the other two.
Space Wolves have A tier numbers, but not A tier representation. So I would say Space Wolves are A tier because we've talked about we want to run purely on numbers, and I would put Dark Angels down in B tier. I hate Dark Angels, and so I often skip them. Dark Angels, for people that want to know, 1.8 average first round loss, which is very good. Like it's borderline average, but they have a win rate of only like 45%. So they definitely have like their T-whip ratio is 1-to-1, which is very strong. That's usually a very balanced army. So what your Dark Angels players have to do is convince your friends not to run Lionel Johnson.
This is unfortunately true.
If you can do that,
100% of the time he makes the list worst.
If you could figure out a way to be like Deathwing Knights are good, please stop running.
See this? No, does not spark joy.
If you want to go 3-2, run the Lion all day, buddy. Live your best life.
What is going on with Space Wolves? So I know that a lot of people, like you said, a lot of people aren't playing them. Unlike just about every single other of the factions, Space Wolves behooves you to taking pretty much like Space Wolves exclusive miniatures the entire time. So it's not like you can just take your Ultramarines army and play it as Space Wolves. Unlike many of the others, if you just had a sword and board Terminator and called it a Deathwing Knight, sure, good job, mate. But you are not going to put a guy on a bike and call it a Thunderwolf Cav. So this is why the player base for Space Wolves is so much smaller, because essentially they've got their own model. Right now, they've got a only Space Wolves model range in play. Their best list is just purely Space Wolves models, with the exception of some Inceptors and stuff like that. What are their numbers at?
So they're at a 50% win rate, which is great. 52, if you use like stat check data. I've got them at a 50, which is solid. Their T-whip ratio is like a 1-to-1. They've had about 150 players. 9 of them have hit T-whip. 5 have gone undefeated. Their average first round loss is a 1.9. So they're in that like low A, top of B kind of scenario for their faction. The big thing is I find is like they're a very good stat check army right now in a lot of smaller GTs, because of Thunderwolf Cav. Right? Like that's their army. They're like basically the one army that can make use of the quote unquote White Scars detachment from the Space Marine Codex. And as long as they dodge their like 4 bad matchups, they're 4 terrible matchups
Yeah,
because they have
horrific.
no answer to very high armor or very few answers to very high armor. Like they can just outscore everybody, right? Like it's a list that can easily just shove 12 to 14 Thunderwolves in your deployment zone turn 1 or 2 and say, okay, if you're not going to kill these, I'm going to score 100, right? So
Yes, correct. What's the Templars looking like comparatively?
Templars are definitely like an A tier faction, but they're kind of almost in that scary zone of being an S tier faction. They have a 55% win rate.
Wow.
They have sorry, let me just bring them back up here because I dropped down to look at Space Wolves. 55% win rate, almost 56, 180 players. Of those 180, 10% of them have hit T-Whip.
Mm-hmm.
They've had 6 players go undefeated. Their average first round loss is 2.01, which is great.
Really good.
Their T-Whip share is a little over, is 4%, and they make up 3% of the field. And that 3% is like, that 3.3% is more than double what they ever are. So people have caught on that Black Templars are probably the best way to play Space Marines, with some people having an argument for Ultramarines.
I don't think there's much of a point arguing. I think they're both awesome choices.
Yeah. And unfortunately, I don't split out Ultramarines from regular Space Marines, so I can't tell you like how much better. We just know from like looking at the players playing them. But like Black Templars, the thing is like they do really well with Ironstorm, and they do really well with Firestorm, both.
And Gladius, but
and Gladius.
Ultras is the vanguard of choice, right? Ultras is the vanguard.
Ultras you want Ultras for vanguard. Black Templars have seen success with Ironstorm, Firestorm, and with Gladius. I think more Gladius than any of the others, but like all of them are very strong. Because Black Templars, due to Crusade squads and Helbrecht and a few other things, they basically run a slightly worse Chaos Space Marine list, right?
Correct.
So, and if you're on your game and you're playing your impulsors properly, like you can beat like the non-mirror of like Chosen and Rhinos. So like it's definitely a very strong army. Black Templars, 5-point multi-meltas on every vehicle in your list is definitely a huge, right? It slaps, 100%. The other A tier factions, Leagues of Votann. They have a 56% win rate, between 53 and 56 depending on the week. StatCheck has them as high as 57, so that's in a danger zone, right? In terms of T-Whip,
they were literally the worst army in the game, and now they're towards the top of A tier. So
and we talked about this. We talked about this in that last episode that I had some concerns. There was like one of the things that I love about Leagues of Votann right now. So from a stats perspective, average first round loss 1.97, so basically a 2, between 53 and 57% win rate depending on your day. Their T-Whip ratio, they make up 3.6% of the meta. They have almost 5% T-Whip, so very good T-Whip ratio. The big thing about Leagues of Votann, I find, and the best way you can tell like that they're so good, is Thunderkin are 75 points, and the best Leagues of Votann players just don't run them.
Yeah, that's
right? Because they don't shoot far enough, and
and they're not in the Sagittar. That's it.
Yeah, and they don't go in a Sagittar like that
or Deep Strike.
That to me, like when I looked at Thunderkin and the changes they made going down to 75 points, I'm like, this is so good.
Busted.
But Sagittars, I said it when the Votann changes came out. I was like, everyone's going to run 5 or 6 Sagittars at the minimum, and that is the case.
Correct.
And so there's like leagues, they have answers to just about everything that's very good in the game. They score amazingly well. It's just at that upper tier, playing into Eldar and Chaos Space Marines in particular, and Black Templars, because they can just blow up all your stuff, as well as like Vanguard Ultramarines. They can blow up your Sagittars and deal with the stuff inside. You just have to play with a little bit more finesse. But against so many other armies, they just win by existing because there's just too much stuff.
There's too much stuff.
Right?
Yeah, they got kind of the inverse of the Custodes buff. They got the holistic buff instead of holistic nerf. threefold increases. And in truth, they literally exchanged places with Custodes. Custodes was an upper A tier and are now the worst army in the game. Votan was the worst army in the game, now an upper A tier. They did an old swapperoo on us, which is hilarious.
And then the last A tier faction is World Eaters. I would put them at the top. And so their numbers, their average first round loss is slightly better than Votan, slightly, and Black Templars. It's like a 2.05.
Yep.
Their win rate is only like if you go over that whole 3-month period, it's only like a 52%. Okay, which you wouldn't say is like an A tier. Well, that's bottom A tier. It shouldn't be top, but in the last month they have spiked excessively. Right after Anthony Vanilla kind of put in that first really good result with World Eaters, they went from being like a B tier faction like all the way up, right? On the other hand, they also picked up a lot of players that just don't know how to run that list. They're too aggressive with them, which is shocking. But still, they have that 2.05 average first round loss. Their T-Whip is almost 6%. They only make up 4% of the meta. And they just keep getting better week to week. We're seeing more and more results coming from World Eaters. So I would say there's a very strong argument between Votan and World Eaters in that area. I know there are people that would say that World Eaters are the arguably like the top 3 armies in the game, and I would say they're third right now.
Yeah. I have loved that debate currently of who is the third best army in the game, because it's not really debatable what's first and what the other two are. It's debatable actually what's first and second in those two at the moment, which we're about to debate. But what was third has always been pretty hotly contested, because some people have been saying it's Sisters of Battle, some people have been saying Votan, some people saying World Eaters. Some madmen out there are saying all sorts of other nonsense as well. But onto our S tier, is no surprise that Eldari and Chaos Space Marines are here, and I personally think Chaos Space Marines are better than Eldar right now.
I would say it's about as close as we've ever been between two top factions.
Yeah, fair. Tell us the numbers, mate.
Okay. So in the last 2 and a little bit months, basically since the Marine Codex became legal.
Yep.
We've had 398 recorded players of Chaos Space Marines, 416 of Eldar. So the numbers are very close. Chaos Space Marines have had 69 players at T-Whip. Nice. Eldari, 71. They've both had 32 players go undefeated. Their average first loss, Eldari is 2.3. Chaos Space Marines is 2.25. Eldari's got a 59% win rate. Chaos Space Marines, 57, but sometimes as high as 59. They both have a 14% share of T-Whip. They both make up a little more than 7% of the field. So like their numbers are very even across the board. Eldari are just like the teensiest bit better.
No, disagree. I'm putting Chaos Space Marines on. No, I'm not.
I'm just saying from the numbers, man. If you're looking at pure numbers.
We work off the numbers here.
And if you look at like stat check data, you'd see in that same time period, it's the same. Eldari, they're showing like a 60% rounded up. Chaos Space Marines are 59. They're looking at 12% for T-Whip for them in their data. I've got them at 14, both of them. Like it's like this is like a very close call, and I would say it comes down to player skill at this point between the two. And like it's still even. Like if you have a top tier Eldar player playing into a top tier Chaos Space Marine player, I would say it's a coin toss as to who's going to win.
Beautiful. Well, let's give you guys the recaps. This is the updated tier list, taking into account all the data we've had post-data slate and the injection of the first 2 codexes. We have in our D tier, Custodes, Imperial Knights, Drukhari, Deathwatch, and Chaos Demons. C tier is Blood Angels, Green Genestealer Cult, and Tyranids, the entire of the Hive Mind. B tier is Astra Militarum, Necrons, Tau, Grey Knights, Chaos Knights, Adeptus Mechanicus, Thousand Suns, Death Guard, Dark Angels, Orcs with an asterisk, and Astartes with an asterisk. That asterisk being they could be a bit of a tweener, as we like to say. A tier is Sisters of Battle, Black Templars, Space Wolves, Leagues of Votan, and World Eaters. And then the S tier, of course, is Chaos Space Marines and Eldari. How do you feel about that, mate? Any we've missed off the top of your head as well?
I don't think we missed anybody. They'll tell us in the comments.
If
which
we
I
did
don't
that, it just means your faction doesn't matter, and we don't respect them.
It's true. I mean, I forgot Dark Angels completely until you reminded me.
Shush.
Um,
Forgot nothing.
that
No one
proves it.
forgets the first.
First is worst. But yeah, like I feel like reading that out. Space Wolves is probably the only one that in my
It's
mind
really
should probably
surprised.
be a little lower.
Yeah. Do you want to chuck him in B?
We can like it. The numbers.
If the numbers say
numbers
they're an A tier
show,
faction,
like, yeah, I'd say let's keep him an A. It's fine. It's fine.
It's
If someone wants to fight me over it later, you don't know where to find me. So
that's right.
hopefully.
That's right. I actually have a question for you because it's one of the questions I would have asked you. How far away are we from being able to do one of these 4 team events?
God, I wish.
Yeah.
I know the stat check guys have been trying real hard to get really good team event data. What I would like to see to get that team event data done properly is I want to see someone look at a modified, like there's an like it's not ELO because ELO is growing in popularity in 40K2, which I love. It's like the thing I wanted since like day 2 of doing stats was that for ELO to grow. ELO doesn't work very well with team settings, but there's a modification of ELO called True Skill that Microsoft created.
Yeah.
Which they use for like Halo and games like that, team games
Yep.
to generate ELO. If we could get somebody to pay Microsoft the money to use True Skill 2, their newest version of True Skill, or to make their own version of it, like that, I would say we would be primed to do like a real good deep dive into how good factions are in teams and the players of those factions both, because it would be very easy to delineate it using that.
You reckon we could just do an anecdotal one?
I mean, yeah, we could do some anecdotal if someone's willing to pull all the teams data, because I don't want to do that anymore.
Yeah, I know. Yuck. But anyway, that brings us to the end of the stats part of the episode. Really appreciate you coming on, mate. Anything in particular you find very spicy about our latest faction update, and in pontificating on if you have any, gut instinct on where AdMech and Necrons might end up? Do you see them get significant lifts out of their codex injection?
I think Necrons are at the very least an A-tier faction.
I agree with that. Yeah,
I think they've got 2 detachments that could potentially be S tier.
Yes, they definitely have 2 that can hang.
Because like Canaptech is very strong, and so is Teleport McGee.
Yeah. Well, me and a lot of other people are concerned that they will nerf the Tesla bomb, which I don't actually believe they need to. I don't think it's as bad as everyone thinks. Maybe I'm just an apologist, but I mean, if they
you're talking about out of the plane, the one that technically doesn't work.
No. Oh yeah, sure. No, I just meant more like the Canoptic Court combo bomb. Yeah.
No, that I think they
off of if they cap the dev wounds is pretty much what I'm saying.
Yeah. No, I agree, because it is insane. It is absolutely insane. How much
absolutely bonkers
Immortals can do in that situation.
Well, and that's my concern with Necrons. You take that away, nothing really does damage. It's pretty soft. But anyway, what do you think about AdMech?
I feel bad for AdMech players. I think AdMech is an okay book. I think that in order to play them very competitively, you need to be very rich and have a lot of hobbying time on your hands.
Yep, I agree with that.
Because I think their best stuff for killing stuff gives up too many points, and I'd like to be wrong about that, but I feel like if you're going to run like dragoons and things,
chickens,
you're just giving up 20 points on Bring It Down just by existing.
Correct.
So I think like to play the best, like you can make a very high scoring AdMech list, but you're spending a lot of money to do it. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if it's there. I think they're a B tier faction.
Well, they're in a B right now, and it would be a little bit sad to see them go down in their codex. Like Tyranids, funnily enough, Tyranids, where did they go? Tyranids were B, and now they're C.
Yeah, and like
injection. So
I hate to see the same thing. Yeah, I think the only reason why AdMech are B right now is because there's like so few people were playing them that it was only their stalwarts. They're like really awesome European players or whatever. And we're going to see the same. We're going to see some people pick it up, but like the best lists are so expensive to run, and they don't kill very much unless you're going really heavy on chickens. So yeah, I'm a little bummed about AdMech. I've talked to some AdMech players, and they say that like playing the game with them is fun, at the very least. So there's that, and that might spur some people to try some new things. We've been wrong about a lot of armies before, and with everything being as tight as it is, it doesn't take much for something like for another Sisters of Battle to show up either, right? For an army that we kind of disregard to all of a sudden be like, well, I've got all the tools because what's good now is what I'm good against.
Yeah, and I suppose that's actually a great comparison from some of my issues with the AdMech book. And I did say it on the AdMech review. It really feels like the 9th edition Sisters book, where it's just a one detachment codex. It's just Bloody Rose. Congratulations, you get to play Bloody Rose for 3 years. And I mean, that's a shame, especially when I was really hopeful that they'd done so well with some of the previous detachments, being like, Space Marines do definitely have, 4 or 5 ways to play. Tyranids have 2 or 3, 1 or 2.
Yeah.
But let us see what happens with the next wave. And Peter, thank you so much again for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
No, my always my pleasure, mate. I'll see you in another couple of months. We'll have, like I said, we'll have the actual data from the things we just pontificated on, and of course, we're going to have a whole new swathe of goodness. We have a balanced data slate coming approximately end of January.
Yep, they're mid to end of January. We're supposed to get a balanced data slate. Theoretically, mid to end of January, we'll be getting a whole new game, an old world, and I just won't care about 40k anymore.
Man, I'm just being homo backing into the hedge. Like, see you later.
Yeah. I've told my buddy who has all my lizardmen. He's had them for 6 years. I'm like, I'm coming. I'm coming.
I'm so excited. Cannot wait. But dude, 40k is in a great freaking place.
It is.
I think we're all impressed.
I would say it's in the best place it's been, at least balance wise, since about mid 8th edition.
Well, just imagine where we were this time in 9th edition, right? Yeah. We were in the absolute S show that was Drukhari at this time. And that Drukhari train did not end for another 6 months past where we are now.
Yeah, and then we just went into other terrible trains. Like, it didn't get better.
Yeah. It didn't get better. We went from that into Crusher Stampede and all that nonsense.
The game was basically, ever since Space Marines 2.0 in 8th edition, we went through probably 3 years or 2 years at the very least, 3 or 4 maybe, of this is not a very good balanced game.
Whereas you're talking about that golden 9 months, or 7 to 9 months in 8th edition, where we had 2 or 3 clearly the best armies, but we had half the game could win a GT.
There was a point in 8th where the best win rate was Gene Stealer Cults, and it was 53.5.
Oh, dude, bless. It was so good.
That was the best. That was kind of the golden age for balance in the game. But this is not bad. Having 2 factions over the top and not needing, I don't think they need a whole lot. I think if you can touch cultists in a bad way and maybe do something like Chosen, Chaos Space Marines probably or Forge Fiends even, they probably come down to earth. And then Eldari, I just need like their whole book thrown in the dumpster, but whatever.
Just delete them. They're a dying faction anyway. Have you read the fluff? They're a dying race. Just let them go, and we'll move on, and we'll be happy for it.
Anyway,
and then undo some nerfs to Custodians and Imperial Knights.
Yeah.
Undo the nerfs to Chaos Demons. Give them please give them back their big demons.
Yeah.
In fact, apart from Drukhari, all the D tier factions are there because of nerfs.
Yeah,
Custodians,
exactly.
Imperial Knights, Death Watch, Chaos Demons. So you can just undo nerfs to undo that. And Drukhari just needs just anything that has a knife now has another rend. And Drukhari maybe are just okay.
I think Drukhari go up a lot with that. And I think the only thing by nerfing Chaos Space Marines a little bit and Eldar a little bit is you then probably do have to bad touch World Eaters. I don't think you need to do anything to Votan. You might have to do a tiny Votan. But
Votan, 10 to 15 points on Sagittars probably is everything you need to do to Votan.
Yeah, up Sagittars so that you're not auto-taking 5 or 6, or that you don't take all the rest when you do.
Correct. Make that 3 or 4, and everything's more reasonable with them.
Yeah. And then I think everything's good. I think if you're going to nerf Chaos Space Marines and Eldar, you need to really look at World Eaters. You can't dodge it. And I think that's my worry with the balanced data slate, is that's exactly what is going to happen, is they're going to not touch World Eaters at all. And we're just going to get stampeded by Blood Boys, which whatever.
I mean, I can deal with that a lot better. That's
I
a
can deal with
refreshing
having
change.
a purely close combat army being the best.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's a refreshing change from 10th edition so far, and a very refreshing change from Eldari, just like nonsensing me from the other side of the table. But anyway, on that note, we're going to check out of this faction ladder update. Hopefully, you guys have enjoyed it at home. Hopefully, you guys are enjoying your 40k. And Peter, my man, thank you very much again for coming on. Always my great pleasure to have you. And look after yourself.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to Art of War Down Under, a content review podcast for Warhammer 40k, hosted by Adam Camilleri, produced by Seamus Ronan. Enjoyed the show? Want your lists reviewed and the content you heard put into practice? Sign up to our Patreon and connect with us online or on Facebook. Just search for Art of War Down Under. Signing out from tomorrow.